In the 1800s, Europe was home to fierce rivals competing for global dominance. Among them were 6 major powers: France, Britain, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Germany. Right next to them was Belgium, a young nation with its second king. His name, Leopard II.
Leopold II seized land in Central Africa.
Consumed with colonization for years and years
and he claimed Congo as his personal property.
Leopard believed to become a superpower, you needed to control a slice of this magnificent African cake. He came up with a sinister plan to trick all the 6 European powers into supporting his ambition, while secretly turning one of the richest land in the world into his private property. The result?
Reign of terror that killed up to 10 million people.
But this video isn't just about Leopard. Instead, I want to focus on the victims. Those who lived through what could arguably be called the darkest period in human history. To truly understand the horrors that took place in the Congo Free State, I found it helpful to break it down into 3 parts. The time before Leopard arrived in the Congo, the time during his rule, and finally, the effect on the region after he was gone.
At the end, I will leave you with a thought-provoking evidence of how the struggle in the Congo today are connected to Leopard's actions more than 100 years ago.
All these groups fight for control of this strategic, mineral-rich region.
The deadliest global conflict since World War II.
Organize them, fund them, support them.
It's a genocide, 10 times worse.
The world's poorest.
Congo is basically a resource-endowed country, but it is also a resource-cursed country.
Okay, let's go back in time before colonialism, which is important to understand what happened during Leopard's era.
Leopold of the Belgians went to Congo. He found a society that was organized in the middle of one of the richest places God ever created.
This region in Central Africa, which is later known as the Congo, was home to powerful and organized societies like the Congo Kingdom, Luba, and the Luanda empires, along with many smaller kingdoms and chieftains. Some of the same kingdoms which had existed 300 years before Belgium would later fight against Leopard and his private army. But we'll get to that later. By the 1600s, these civilizations had a system of governance, trade, and culture. While in Europe, industrialization had begun in the late 1700s. Africa, on the other hand, was behind the large-scale industrial system of the West. But in the Congo, kingdoms thrived with their own way of life. They traded ivory, copper, and other resources with nearby regions.
But while the Industrial Revolution, England inventors had found new ways to harness nature's energy. They built new kinds of machines, powered pollution from coal power, and they made enormous profits in their industrial centers.
Europe's Industrial Revolution created a growing demand for raw materials, fueling European interest in Africa's resources. For about the first 400 years, Europe colonizers focused on Africa's coast, leaving the interior, and as a result, the Congo untouched. Until the mid-1800s, the Congo was the heart of the independent Africa, with few Europeans daring to enter the dense interior. You might wonder, why didn't the Europeans venture into the Congo before Leopard? Well, the answer is simply because the risk were just too great. The Congo's land was vast, covered with dense impenetrable
home to untold, untamed creatures.
Poisons eventually result in death.
shortest river in the world.
Tropical diseases that kept Europeans away.
Claim thousands of lives each year.
On top of that, apart from the local population and some Arab traders, much of the Congo's wealth, its ivory, rubber, and minerals, was unknown to the outside world until the late 1800s. When King Leopold II had his eyes on this large piece of land in Central Africa, which was not yet colonized by any European powers. Okay, this is where I take a minute and explain Leopard's life. It's the year 1865.
At the age of 30,
Leopard is now king after succeeding his father. Before this moment, Leopard had spent years traveling and studying other European colonies. His obsession with securing a colony for Belgium only grew stronger after this moment of his crowning. Before his death, Leopard's father had shown some interest in colonial ventures, but it was Leopard II who made it his life's mission. After failing to buy colonies in Africa and Asia, Leopard changed his strategy.
For many days we followed a twisting, tortuous path up the Kafue River, never before traveled by white man, and where rotting jungle growth seemed to...
Europeans almost always justified colonization by claiming they were bringing civilization, Christianity, and progress to the African people. Leopard used the same argument to gain access to the African continent. In 1876, Belgium was just 46 years old and lacked the soldiers and weapons to compete against the major European powers like France and Britain. Leopard needed a different plan to take control of the Congo. So, using his personal wealth, he created the International African Association in 1876, claiming it was a scientific and humanitarian group. To secure his foothold in the region, he hired Henry Moulton Stanley, a well-known explorer who had traveled along the Congo River and through the dense forest that many Europeans feared. Stanley became Leopard's main agent in the Congo. His job was to map the land, set up trade posts, and sign treaties with local chiefs. Between 1879 and 1884, Stanley signed about 450 treaties that handed land and resources over to Leopard. Of course, the local chiefs didn't realize this. They were confused and intimidated by the display of Stanley's Western technology. But Stanley wasn't invincible, which he claimed he was. And he wasn't a magician, but what he did seemed like magic to the local people. And so the chiefs marked the treaties with an X as a signature, believing they were forming alliances, not giving up their lands. Rivalries over the Congo grew, with Leopard facing competition from France and Portugal. Portugal wanted the Congo because of its old trade ties in the region, while Britain supported Leopard and Belgium to block France's expansion. These tensions led to the Berlin Conference, where European nations met to divide Africa with little regard for its people.
That's what Leopold is consumed with. It's colonization.
The year is 1884 and the Berlin Conference begins. Leopard has been preparing for this moment for years. At the conference, he presents himself as a humanitarian, saying that he wants to bring civilization to Africa through his non-profit organization. He is going to bring clarity and science to the African people. To strengthen his claim on the Congo region, Leopard negotiates with his rival France and Portugal, dividing the parts of the Congo basin between them, but keeping the largest piece he had already claimed through Stanley. At this period, Leopard is also looking for the support of the United States. So,
To win them over, he shows the United States president the reports and treaties that Stanley had signed with local chiefs, making it seem like the African people want him to rule. From 1884 to 1885, the Berlin Conference marked the official start of the scramble for Africa and the beginning of Leopard's rule over the Congo. By 1885, the Congo Free State was established as Leopard's private property, making him the undisputed ruler. Throughout the video, I've tried to keep the explanation simple. And now that I'm about to explain of how the system of the Congo Free State was run, simplicity is key to understand all parts of this history. Here it goes. We are now in the 1890s. Leopard has total control of the Congo Free State. He replaces his humanitarian organization over the Congo with an administration. Basically, the entire Congo is now ruled by Leopard and 3 other Europeans he appointed. To the Congo capital in Boma, he sends a governor and a chief of police to oversee the colony. And beneath the overseers are 19,000 force public soldiers led by about 1,000 European officers, including Belgian officers and European mercenaries. Over time, these men become slave masters to the Congolese people. As one young Belgian officer wrote, "I should have been horrified at the idea in Europe, but it seems quite natural here. Don't show this letter to anyone indiscreet." In this period, the Congo Basin was divided into 14 districts, then zones, sectors, and posts. At every level, Europeans were in charge. But Leopard and his people weren't the only one who wanted to exploit the Congo's wealth. Large companies also wanted a piece of the wealth in the Congo Free State. Seeing that, Leopard gives 1/3 of the land to companies to collect rubber and ivory to send back to Europe. These companies are allowed to govern their own lands and punish the locals who don't meet quotas. In return for the lands, the companies now pay Leopards dividends every year. This whole system is enforced by the Force Publique, the largest army in Africa at that time. Back in 1885, this military force was originally created to fight against the Arab slave trade that had been taking part in the east part of the Congo for over 1,000 years. But fast forward in the 1890s, the Force Publique's main role is to exploit the local people for forced labor. Many of the soldiers from the Force Publique were kidnapped as children during village raids. They grew up in Roman Catholic missionary churches, and in those churches they were trained under conditions close to slavery. A grown Force Publique soldier is then armed with a gun and a chariot. Each soldier is given orders not to waste bullets, and for any bullets that are shot, a hand of the victim has to be provided as proof for efficiency. And now, in the local societies, the local chiefs who had been tricked to giving away their lands have no more power. They are forced to obey or be killed. In the decades of Leopard's rule, the men became the targets of Leopard's cruelty. The men are the labor needed to exploit the Congo's wealth. Men are forced to collect wild rubber from vines. This was a painful process. A worker would slash vines to collect the milky white liquid, which is known as rubber lax. He then had to smear the lax on his body. The lax would harden on the sun or by fire. And then, once hardened, it would be scrubbed off the skin, painfully removing the hair and skin. There were other ways to get the rubber, but Leopard chose this brutal method to maximize rubber production and the profits for him and his companies. Punishment for not meeting quotas was brutal, as one local survivor said, "When we failed and our rubber was shot, the armies came to our towns and killed us. Many were shot, some had their ears cut off, others were tied up with ropes around their necks and taken away." In the Congo Free State, the women and children are held as hostage or abused, facing horrors too terrible to describe. Leopard never set foot in the Congo, but his actions changed it forever. Economically, only Leopard and some European elites that supported him benefited. By the late 1800s, thanks to the automobile and the bicycle, the global demand for rubber skyrocketed, and Leopard tightened his control over the Congo's wealth. But by the early 1900s, the tide was turning as reports of the atrocities in the Congo began to reach the outside world. Once Leopard had gained control of the Congo in 1885, several Congolese groups fought back. Resistance was widespread across the country, but the same thing that stopped Europeans from entering the Congo in the first place was now a disadvantage to the local resistance. Because of the Congo's vast size and difficult terrain, it was difficult to organize this resistance into one coherent force. So the fights were spread and small throughout the country. Like the Baluba and Kuba kingdom resisted Leopard's attempt to take over the land. One of the most significant uprising was the Pappelallee rebellion. The rebellion soldiers were from the Titela ethnic group and had been part of Leopard's force publique, so they had the training and the weapons. This rebellion lasted for several years but was eventually suppressed by Leopard's army, which had superior firepower. After these conflicts, the Belgians reformed the force publique so that no single ethnic group represented the majority in any given unit. There were many other uprisings and acts of resistance by the Congolese people, but nearly all of them failed. It's now the beginning of the 1900s. A new, cheap, and easy-to-use camera gets the world to pay attention. You see, back in the 1890s, an African-American journalist, George Washington Williams, had written one of the first open letters to Leopard, exposing the abuses in the Congo. Leopard responded by sponsoring books that supported and justified his rule. In the late 1800s, the truth was being distorted by the politics in Europe. But that began to change when British missionary John Harris and his wife Alice had something that no one had before them: proof. They brought the truth to light through photographs that documented the mutilations and violence. These images were supported by testimonies from the local villagers in the Kasai region. Communities along the Congo River spoke of the killings and the mutilations, while villages in the Ubangi region recounted of how chiefs were forced to cooperate or be executed. So altogether, the works of George Washington Williams, the Congo Reform Association, missionaries, and the voices of the Congolese people themselves finally brought Leopard's
empire crumbling down.
Under intense international pressure, the Belgian government forced Leopard to give up control of the Congo Free State and its people. In 1908, Belgium officially bought the Congo from Leopard for 50 million and renamed it the Belgian Congo. You know, there's a saying that bad guys don't get away with it. Leopard got away with it, as the following year, in 1909, he died peacefully in his deathbed, leaving Belgium and the Congolese people to deal with this mess.
Belgium address systemic racism and make amends for its brutal colonial legacy. Protests have rocked Belgium as demonstrators demand the removal of statues of King Leopold II, who became king in 1865 and ruled what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo as his own personal colony until 1908, in a reign of terror that killed up to 10 million people.
To be clear, even without Leopard, the Congo likely would have been colonized by another European power. And with no doubt, they would have exploited the people and minerals, but not to the extent that Leopard went to. The scale of the atrocities under Leopard's rule were unmatched. By the time Belgium took control of the Congo in 1908, the Congolese people were deeply scarred by the brutality of Leopard. For perspective, consider the Holocaust impact on the Jewish people, or to a lesser extent, consider the impact of the Great Depression in the United States. These events changed the minds of those who grew up in that era. Trauma runs deep, and in this case, Leopard had set a precedent that life in Central Africa was cheap. When was the last time that you heard there was a war in Central Africa and your response was a shrug of the shoulders? Leopard's actions created a blueprint that made the Congo a target for foreign powers seeking wealth no matter the cost. This blueprint was later used as the US and the Soviet Union backed groups that were fighting for the Congo's resources. After Congo's independence in 1960, control over gold, diamond, and other valuable resources became the source of many conflicts in the Congo. In other words, Leopard's era of brutality led to Belgium exploiting the Congo's wealth, which later led to Mobutu Sese Seko's corrupt dictatorship, which then led to the First Congo War. And then just a year after the First Congo War, the Second Congo War happened. The Congo has endured cycles of violence. Although Leopard was not the only cause, he is a major catalyst in these cycles of violence. His reign planted a seed of instability that still affects the Democratic Republic of Congo today. If you are still watching, I just have one question for you. How would the Congo be without Leopard?